One of the interesting things about digital diplomacy is that it takes place in a space that's largely available to us here in Williamsburg, Virginia. So traditionally, if you want to study diplomacy, you either had to be in the meeting itself, you had to look at a declassified transcript, you had to talk to somebody who was there. One of the neat things about digital diplomacy is because it's taking place on Twitter, my students can go on Twitter and look at what diplomats are tweeting, look at the ways in which diplomats are engaging with themselves and each other, and look at the variation in the ways that countries use digital media. So let me give you a couple examples of how this plays out in the classroom. One of my students is looking at the ways in which China, as the state, projects itself through digital means to other countries. And her hypothesis is that if we look at Chinese embassies and the Facebook pages that they have and the Twitter accounts that they have, that the message is going to be slightly different in, say, South American countries than Asian countries. And her hypothesis is based on this theory that China has different interests in those two locations, and so it's going to want to project a slightly different image to both places. And that's a testable hypothesis, and she can go onto the Facebook sites of these embassies and do a content analysis of what is on those pages, what are the images that they're using, what are they talking about, what are the topics, and compare them. And so I think that's really neat, and that's something that you wouldn't be able to do 10 years ago, but because all of this is available to us online, it opens up different research avenues. Another one of my students is working on a project where he's interested in diplomats fighting on the internet. So occasionally, and this goes into the area of against best practice, you will see Twitter wars or trolling take place between diplomats. So just as high school kids and college kids sometimes engage in this type of behavior, diplomats do as well, unfortunately. So he's interested in why diplomats would put themselves out there on Twitter and engage in these fights, which seem to be fairly irrational because nothing's going to come of it other than embarrassment or perhaps a very quick emotional satisfaction to put somebody down online. But what drives that for him is the interesting question. So by comparing episodes of diplomats fighting on the internet, he thinks he can be able to develop a theory about when and under what conditions they engage in this type of behavior. The other nice thing about digital diplomacy is that it can be studied experimentally. So one of the things that we do in our laboratory here at William & Mary is we have students look at web pages, i.e. Twitter pages or Facebook pages or embassy websites that have been manipulated in some way to project a particular image, and then we can see what effect that image has on decision making after you've read the website. So if the idea is that from a public diplomacy perspective, using a particular image to project a type of state that you want to convey that you're a peaceful state or you want to convey that you have good cooperative intentions, there should be some effect of that message that's being read by people who are looking at the webpage. So we can test that. We can see whether or not people who look at a particular website, a particular image, have different types of decisions that they make versus the times that they don't view those images. So one of the things we have not looked at yet is the Internet Wayback Machine, which is essentially an archive of websites. And that's a really interesting idea because we could go back and look and say, you know, in a particular period of time where we know what the outcome is, we can see what the United States or other countries were doing online, what image they were projecting, were they trying to do something and it didn't work out well. That provides a very nice opportunity to compare what's going on in the present with what's going on in the past, and the benefit of looking at the past is that we know exactly what happens. And so we can sort of connect the dots. So I think the use of utilities and websites like the Internet Archive, the Wayback Machine, will be incredibly useful in the future as more and more students start to get into the digital diplomacy research.